Hi, welcome back, everyone. Hope all of you had a good lunch that was catered for all of you. So without further ado, we're going to move on to panel 5. Now, the topic is digital transformation and creating access. Now, our panel, we can see here. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Ms. Yipei, In-Gallery Digital Media Team, Palace Museum, China. Professor Haga Mitsuru, Professor, Institute for Excellence in Higher Education, Tohoku University, Japan. Mr. Jervais Choo, Deputy Director, Organizational Design and Innovation, National Heritage Board. And this panel will be moderated by Ms. Gaille Teo, Manager, Family Policy, Ministry of Social and Family Development. So before I hand the time over, once again, I believe all of you know the drill. You can use Pigeonhole. You can start to post your questions. If not, Ms. Teo will ask you questions if you want. Later on, when you raise your hands, you can ask via the microphone. So without further ado, let's get this session started. I'd like to hand the time over to Ms. Gaille Teo. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome back from lunch. We expected to see a lot of food coma faces after lunch. Thank you for heading back. So this morning, panel 4 said that they mentioned who pays what. It was actually really interesting to hear that Singaporeans pay X amount of dollars. Actually, for our panel, it's about the possibilities of digital transformation. And if you think about it, most of us in the room will not pay even $1 to look at a website or to download an app. So welcome to this panel where the expectations and demands of what we think digital technology can do in museums or in our cultural institutions are very high. And yet customers may or may not be willing to pay a certain top dollar for it. But so even though it's often free and not physical, digital technology has many things that it could do, and we'll run through a quick list before our panelists describe more closely what they do in their institutions. So for example, 1, we expect digital technology to enhance learning. It has to enhance learning for young, for old, for disabled, for marginalized. It also has to increase access for diverse communities. It has to make physical spaces more interesting. It has to preserve historical and cultural memory, whether this is through archaeological imaging or data storage. It also has to increase profits, decrease costs, use big data, use artificial intelligence, use augmented reality AR, virtual reality VR, and all kinds of other hype words like blockchain and big data. So in today's world of digital disruption in which we all live in right now, it is my privilege to not have to unpack this for you, but to leave it to my esteemed panelists to unpack this journey of digital transformation for you, but also share on the principles for how we can use digital technologies more meaningfully. When this panel ends, we hope that you walk out of those doors with a bit more of a sense of what we're all doing in our various cultural institutions. So first of all, we have Ms. Yipei. Ms. Ye is a digital curator of the In-Gallery Digital Media Team in the Palace Museum, China, a position she has held since 2014. We look forward to seeing the digital work that she's doing, which includes the Dagao Xuandian Digital Gallery, which in English means this hall of high heaven or tall temple. Take it away, Ms. Ye.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, and it's my privilege being invited here and sharing my experience on museum digitalization with you. I work on the In-Gallery Digital Media team in the Palace Museum. And for anyone who are not familiar with the Palace Museum, I would like to give you a brief introduction about it. Okay. The Palace Museum is located in the Imperial Palace of the consecutive Ming and Qing dynasties. The magnificent architectural complex is also known as the Forbidden City. Beyond the architecture, the museum has the vast holdings of paintings, calligraphy, ceramics, and the antiquity of the imperial collections, which make it one of the most prestigious museums in China and the world. Since the museum launched the daily limitation of visitors to 80,000, the annual visitor capacity remains stable and the total number gradually increases. It sounds like an astonishing and promising number, as if the traditional culture has reached to a vast number of people. However, that is not exactly true. The majority of the visitors are guided group who spend averagely an hour in the museum. They scurried from the entrance and straight to the exit. And I once asked one of them how did he feel about the Palace Museum, and he answered, "I'm now in the Forbidden City, but where is the Palace Museum?" And he said he saw many empty halls, but nothing else. And he doesn't even know that the museum has a collection of 1.86 million items. So you can see that there's so much things that we need to do. The digitalization of the Palace Museum started 20 years ago, starting with taking photographs of our collection, building up collection management system, museum information system, office automation system, architectural 3D scanning, and building up 3D model database, etc. With the enrichment of our digitalized materials and development of technology, we moved on to build up websites, image-based academic research system, making virtual reality film series, apps, and managing social media accounts. We released Chinese website version 2, including all the achievements made by the museum so far, and the English website is updated last year, and now it satisfies 3 needs as ordinary guides, cultural popularization, and academic research for relevant content. And both Chinese and English website feature a searchable database of selected masterpieces online. And in addition, we built a website for youngsters featuring cartoon images and animation, telling bits of knowledge of ancient China and the Palace Museum. This is a short episode of the animation we made. It's called The Adventure in the Palace Museum. The website includes the image-based academic research system, which provides high-resolution images of paintings and calligraphies for users to appreciate, and even for academic research purpose. Okay, in recent years, we have been keen to develop apps both on iOS and Android platform, and so far we have accomplished 10 apps, and now working on the 11th. We hope that with the benefits of interactive experience and eye-catching user interface design, more and more young people or people who are not interested in the traditional culture or people who have never been to a museum could be our potential audience. With the projects unfolded, our digital cultural presentation platform was gradually taking shape. We follow the philosophy, help people of different cultural backgrounds understand museums and the Palace Museum. Oh my God. Having created vast numbers of digital assets, we think it's time to move on from online project to offline project, and we started to do in-gallery digital curation. In 2015, our first digital gallery was established in the Duanmen Gate. It's the principal entrance to the Palace Museum. And our first exhibition is named The Palace is a Museum. We would like to introduce the museum thoroughly in a digital way, and through the interaction with the digital content, visitors will receive preliminary answers to common questions such as, what is the Palace Museum? What does the museum's collection contain? And what might one see in the museum? And in 2017, the second exhibition was opened, entitled Discovering the Hall of Mental Cultivation, a Digital Experience. It provides visitors accessibility to the forbidden chamber of the emperor's residence. You may walk into the chamber through virtual reality technology, seeing everything as it was in its heyday, and talk with a senior minister with the help of artificial intelligence technology. You may also read report from the official and rate the report either good or bad, depending on how the player thinks the emperor would think. And during the opening period, the exhibition received over 1,200 visitors and swarms of social media influence. And in order to increase access to the exhibition, we set up a plan of touring exhibition for reaching out to more audience. And so far, the exhibition has been presented at Archon Art Center in Shenzhen and the Taiyuan Museum in Shanxi Province in China. And frankly speaking, the domestic museum did not constitute a precedent, always a paradigm for the digital curation when we were working on the previous two exhibitions. And no similar cases, no design standards, no implementation modalities. So the experience is gained by us while we were doing it. It's a long process of trial and error over various prototype stages. As to the opportunity and challenges associated with innovative practice supported by the digital curation, I think it depends on individual situation. I heard that peers from art gallery complain that their audience keep an eye on their iPhones and never concentrate on the paintings, or the interactive installation distract people's attention from the real works. I can fully understand their concerns, but as I said, it depends on the individual situation. The way you combine the digital technology with the content and the way you launch the project really matters. Then there was a time when our digital presentation were not favorably disposed, and we collect so many reviews and feedback from the previous projects, and keep revising the outline of the next one. For the Palace Museum, we think that the combination of traditional culture and digital technology makes the museum off limits. And first, it animates the museum and breaks the stereotype that museums are aloof and unapproachable, and bringing more young people and join them into the museum. And second, the dismantleable and producible digitalized materials create effective outreach. The digital materials, including database and the user interface design materials, can be customized for different presentation projects. And this digital presentation can be accessible for the world. And third, the images, videos, 3D models, and metadata of museum collection provide technical support for restoration and conservation. The digital materials can be used not only for the digital curation, but also for the routine conservation and the restoration activities. And before my speech goes to an end, I would like to play a trailer of our digital exhibition, which is the Hall of Mental Cultivation, a digital experience. Please enjoy. is the logo of our exhibition. Okay, that's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Ye. I was struck by your comparison of the physical space and the digital space. It's really interesting because your story about the man being lost in the Palace Museum really shows on one hand that in the real world, even getting educational outcomes and achieving authentic experiences can be difficult, even when you're in the real world. And on the other hand, your story about visitors looking at the iPhone and missing out on the real world also shows that achieving educational outcomes and getting that authentic experience is very hard in the digital space. Thank you. And next up, we have Professor Haga Mitsuru. I am a data scientist for the Singapore government, so I actually Googled professor. But then I read his online bio, and I found it so intriguing, I will stick to reading it in a dramatic voice. Following the path of Alexander the Great, Professor Mitsuru has excavated a Greek Kushan city in Uzbekistan. He has been studying the transmission of iconography of Greek and Roman mythology towards the East, in which Buddhism played an important role. Professor Mitsuru is professor at Tohoku University, Institute for Excellence in Higher Education, Japan, and his fields of specialty are ancient Greek and Roman ancient Central Eurasian archaeology, as well as higher education theory.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. First of all, I deeply thank Academy of Singapore for having me here. Thank you very much. And I thank all for who made this great symposium possible. And the task that you have given me, one of the first is digital transformation. If I jump into one of the conclusions, what is the strong point of digital museum? It's a new imperial museum in the capital of sovereign state shall never be built. No more British museum. While in the digital museum, one can, in principle, collect everything that is made by human being. And also, it is for all the people from anywhere on the earth. So it's very democratic. And it's not looted, it's only scanned, so no more art repatriation problems. So it's the real world Grand Central Museum for all humankind. And the other thing I like to say is the conclusion is the plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I talk about the digitalization, but I think at the end, it stays the same. So let's see the digital museum first from the point of view of collection and preservation. And you can also, of course, collect digitally objects of art, but not just that, but also a site. This is one done by one of my colleagues. It's the digital biome of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, taken from, scanned from the camera on the balloon. Or, this is a sad example, but as you know, the Palmyra was occupied by so-called IS, and they blown up this Bell Temple, the Roman temple in August 2015. And as you see, up before there was, and down after, you don't see it. It's gone from the face of the earth. But just by chance, before that, in 2010, a Japanese, my colleague, archaeologist, scanned this temple. And in the future, when we all human beings united, rebuilt this temple, we'll be very glad to offer this data. And this is what we have. And this is from outside. It's very good, well done. And this is from inside. We have this. So this is what the digital museum can do. And also, I give you another example from the point of view of collection and preservation. This is a digital cyber museum in Japan, and three-dimensional digital information created in cyberspace by Professor Kyoko Sengo Haga of Tokyo University, who is my colleague and who is very beautiful, who is my wife also. So I may say that. You know? What she did is, her team scanned these Greek statues, and they created the 3 added things and 3D models inside, and this is the digital cyber museum that her team created. And into it, you can go into it with your avatar, and with the avatar you can catch, rotate, and bring it to you and anything you want. And you can reach there from simultaneously from anywhere on the world. And not yet, but in the future, maybe not anymore projector or monitor, but you can have the 3D display by HoloLens. And let's now look at the research point of view. And Kyoko, did another research of the close comparative research of the objects of many museums with high accuracy. And so she did this, and she studied the study of Polycletus. I think you know he is one of the most famous important sculptor of the 5th century Greek. And in the Cyber Museum, she compared this statue of the 2 statues by the Polycletus, and especially their faces. And the conclusion is that the Polycletus made different statue from one model. This is a new thing that she found out, her team found out. And another research they did is there is a very long disputed 3 Amazon problem, which there's 3 types of Amazons, but we didn't know which one is done by Polycletus. And so she comparison of the 3D shape comparison, the faces of the known Polycletus statues with the 3 types, and the conclusion is that this type is made by Polycletus, and she ended the more than 100 years long dispute of this 3 Amazon problem. And what husband do, I do, is this is what I do. I don't have time to go into detail, but as you see, that's the Buddha. But sitting next to him is the Heracles. That is what I'm studying, but this is not what I'm asked to talk about. So this is my site on the border between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. And I also do the 3D research of, this is cost distance analysis of the site, or view range from my city, my Greek city in Asia toward Hindu Kush in Afghanistan. Okay, enough. And then from the point of view of education and appreciation, maybe you know already, but we have in Japan a very good it's called National Treasure. And you can see the treasures, national treasures online, and it's more real than the real at your home. Or this is another famous example of Atheneum Art Museum in Helsinki, Finland. They have this at-home appreciation, and it's a new platform, new way of appreciation, enlargement and empowerment of the people who embrace and enjoy art, and especially this is for senior citizens. That's one of the points. Or another example will be, as you know, the Greek statues were not white. They were painted, like this one. So if you go to the homepage of this, the museum in Athens, Acropolis Museum in Athens, you can pick up any brush you want here. It's not working. And you can paint that white, nowadays white marble statue, to how it was, as you like. So it is now not simple access, but we're moving toward interactive participation. So please go there and enjoy. Or we have in Japan this VR reconstruction of a house in Pompeii, but I have been showing you the reconstruction, but some might say that they're not real. Then please come to Otsuka Museum of Art in Japan. Do you drink Pocari Sweat? Do you? Otsuka is a private company who sells Pocari Sweat, and with the money they made with Pocari Sweat and other things, they created this Otsuka Museum of Art, which has a full-size ceramic reproduction. So you have there full-size Vatican Sistina Capella, and next to it, sort of Scroveni chapel. And you have 7 sunflowers of the Van Gogh in one room. And this is one of the #1 loved museum in Japan, and they are really loved. Or, if I may say, first of all figures and images of Buddha and the Jesus are copies. They are copies of the real historical persons, and or they are earthly avatars of the real spirits in the heaven. So what would be, this might cause dispute, but anyways. So then the VR should have the same value as the image of the Buddha and Jesus Christ. Maybe the one on the left is one of the first image of Buddha as human being of the Kanishka, the first, the king, and the right one is the very famous Peace Christ, so-called. And in the middle is the wax dolls. So now this is the number 2 task, creating access that is given to us. So we should make museum more interesting in a digital way. And of course, this is open data is one of the way. And we have to say that also parody is the culture. And also, I don't go into the detail, but these are some advanced museum in this field. So you can go in and check each museums in the United States and Japan. Or we should simply lower the barriers between the real and the virtual or make it seamless. And so from a private company, American department stores, Macy's, they made a store app which raised the mind share, and the sales volume of this department became very big. So why don't we have seen already, make more museums apps, just like the Macy's stores. Or we can learn from the history of international exposition. Exposition its objective was just like the museums at the beginning, enhancing national prestige. But in 1994, they changed the objectives from that to problem solving. And museums should do this too. So the exhibitions that we had in Aichi in Japan, and also it's just been decided, Osaka will be on some topic. So we should also set the task to be solved in each museum. Or the seamless between the real and the virtual has been the theme of the culture for centuries. Like this, I don't have time to go into detail, but the Han, the story of or maybe it's more famous, this one is more famous by Yurisnad, in which Wan Fu is a Chinese painter, disappeared forever in the ocean, what he created. So there is there is seamless between the real and the virtual. What has been the theme for the culture for us for centuries. But what is the difference between the old way painting camera and what we have now, new VR? I think they are completely different. Painting or camera is the reproduction of the whole universe, world, into the one small room. We shut ourselves into a dark room, camera obscura, from where we enjoy the collected image of the world. It's a little world, but the VR is reversal phenomena in which one moves into the world of images and one encounters the world without frame and meets others there, just like in the movie Ready Player One. Or, this is a very good example to show the possibility of digital world. I think the Second Life. In that Second Life, collective virtual shared space, cyberspace, there's a mutual self-help chat group of the autism spectrum disorder people. They cannot communicate freely in this real world, but there they can. They can be more natural, maybe not real, but more natural in the virtual space. So this, I think, is a good possibility of digital world. Or, this is something very new in Japan. He is the person with severe disabilities who has to stay in a bed, or only what he can do is just maybe move the eyes, controls the robot, and talks through the robot in the cafe, and serve cafe and tea, and speaks through the robot at the cafe. They work socially, and they earn money. And this is not welfare. It is not AI. It's SF. And maybe we can do this. We can maybe ask him to do work as a museum guide in the museum. Why not? Or seamless between the real and the virtual. I think it's not the undiscovered country from whose born no traveler returns that we know not of. It's something very familiar, because if we think of the Chinese abacus, it is nothing but tangible digital decimal system. We can touch the tangible digital things in this Chinese, and also in Japan we use that, but it's not the black box. You can see it, you can touch it. But since we have this computer, everything became black box. So I think you know his name. He's a Japanese professor at the MIT, and he makes the things intangible. He makes intangible tangible, seamless interface between human and the digital information. Like, I think these are the famous things that he made. Like the one right, up right, is the brush, IO brush, the brush which captures the colors that brush touches. So, and with that color, the brush absorbs the color, and with that color, you can paint it. So the color will be with stories and sentimental values. So new device, new way of communication. And we should make things more interesting. Like, this is something also new in Japan, techno-Buddhist sermon. That monk is nothing but the DJ. And you see the upright, in the climax moment, the statue of Buddha on the drone appears and flies towards you. It's magnificent. We should be this emotional as they are. So, or anyways, what I think is make process visible. Let the people join the process. Don't just see the last phase. It's not interesting. It's better to show the constitution with correction process, like not left but right. Or we can maybe learn from the development of the concepts of the design. I think you know the barrier-free design, but that is nothing but the reasonable accommodation, which could lead to social exclusion. The barrier-free, you have to go that right one, not left. That is exclusion. So we have universal design, but there is a difference between universal design and inclusive design. And I think inclusive design is what we, the people of the museum, of the cultural institution, should do. So the difference, this is this is inclusive design, and this is the concept of design, how different inclusive design from the conventional ones. And the difference between the two is that universal design, designers design, and parties concerned don't join the process. But in the inclusive design, designers and the people with challenges, persons concerned, they design the thing together. So I think this is what we should do in our museum too. If I go back, you see the goal of the universal design and inclusive design are the same, but the approach is different. Let the specific distinguished people join the design the products with designers from the stage of designing so that no one shall be excluded. So the relationship between the considering people, maybe us, and be considered people, the disabled, should not be high top and low bottom, but we should be equal. In this inclusive design, it is equal. So we should apply this inclusive design concept to the digitalization of the cultural institution field too. And this is already happening, I think, in a sense, in Europeana, for example. Europeana lets the ordinary people use the API, application program interface, and the people can develop tools freely. And DP, digital Public Library of America. They are doing the same thing. So we should do more in this field. But we should never forget that the fundamental principle of the museum is that the museum consists of the original real materials. This is I think, forever the principle. Like, this is a degrading example, but I don't know if you know this movie, stupid movie, but interesting. Frozen Sylvester Stallone wakes up in 2031 into the future Los Angeles, and he has the virtual relationship using headgears. But at the end, he gets angry and he says, let's do it in the old-fashioned way. Have you seen this stupid movie? But so it was a little bit stupid, so let's put it this way. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And to conclude, and to begin with, art is nothing but an intermediary bridge or middle between us between many of us. For a good example will be the art classes held in the slum for the poor in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, USA. And there should be many other examples. And the other conclusion is asylum. Museum should be safe and neutral for anyone. Also, of course, for the disabled, without fear. And for all this, and another thing is intergenerational ethic. Museum are time institutions to fulfill moral obligation to the future, which owns the present, consisting of the assets from the past. And everything we do, this digital transformation and creating assets is for this asylum and intergenerational ethic, I think. Thank you very much.
Professor Mitsuru, thank you for your energy. I think you argued for accessibility in a very powerful way. There were many points, so I will try to distill them as best as I can. One, I really took away the seamless movement between real and virtual. I'm sure we could have a longer discussion on what virtual means to you, but we'll leave that for the Q&A. I caught some glimpses of a bit about representation of the world in another way. So your definition of virtual, we'll leave that for Q&A maybe. Second, also about democratic processes, democratic inclusion of audience, but also in the presentation, what you present, how you present it, why you do so. And lastly, why you do that, right? So I know you didn't have time. Thank you for speeding through that presentation. I know you didn't have time. I know you want to get to the last slide, particularly on obligations to the future, right? Things about past generations to future generations, what that means, especially now that digital technology, as you said in the start of your presentation, can now record everything, now that data storage is so cheap. But we'll leave that for later. So it's like a candy that I'm sure the audience will hold in their mouths. Last but not least, we have Mr. Jervais Choo. He is from the NHB, Organizational Design and Innovation. He's Program Director for the DigiMuse project at the National Museum of Singapore, which aims to advance digital innovation within the museum sector. Mr. Choo currently leads the digital transformation efforts for the NHB and has a keen interest in bringing together new methods of bridging experience and understanding through contextual layering and interventions. And now, Mr. Choo, you have to explain what that means to us.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. So yes, I have been with the National Museum, I think, for the past 5 years, and recently kind of moved into a new role with the National Heritage Board, which Gaille kindly mentioned, which is essentially looking at transformation for the National Heritage Board as a whole, of which digital certainly features quite strongly in any of these considerations. But to start off the presentation, I think it's probably useful to give a bit of context of what the National Museum is and, as an entity, as an institution, and how it has evolved. So very quickly, for the benefit also of our international guests, the National Museum has a rich history. I think it can be traced back all the way to, I think, 1849, when the idea of a museum was first mooted. And we have been in its current location at Stamford Road for 131 years, so since 1887. That building that we currently occupy has always been a museum. We started off predominantly as pretty much an ethnographic museum with a natural history collection. Along the way, we have since evolved many different iterations. The museum has been expanded, and the collection is pretty much now a social history collection. With the natural history collection having been transferred over to the National University, which most of it is currently housed at the Lee Kuan Yew Natural History Museum at present. So we like to think of ourselves as the mother of all museums in Singapore in the sense that we are the first. But at the same time, we like to think that we are the museum with the youngest soul, because we have been very actively looking at how we can be relevant, remain relevant to our audiences, to be accessible and inclusive in some of the programs that we do, and particularly in some of the initiatives that we have done since the 2015 revamp. I will explain a little bit. So this is an image of the National Museum's main rotunda. So this rotunda has been there, has been the main rotunda since 1887. It's the main entrance of the National Museum. What you see suspended there is actually a contemporary art installation, and as a museum, as an institution, we feel very strongly that it's not just about presenting history, but also making it relevant, as I mentioned, and contemporary art does have a wonderful role to play to kind of center it in its present context of how it is perceived, or how of local current perspectives of what a museum is and how it should be presented. But the point is that with this, in 2006, the museum underwent a entire redevelopment where we built an entire new wing to the museum at the back. We added about 4,000 square meters of exhibition space in that revamp. And since that time, until the 2015 revamp, for most of you who are familiar, 2015 marked the Singapore 50th year of independence, and that's where we took the opportunity to also redevelop the permanent galleries of the National Museum. Now, with that, while we were reconceptualizing what we wanted to do with the permanent galleries in 2015, demographics played a huge role in it. In 2006, for instance, the iPhone was not yet proliferated. So that was, of course, the previous time when the permanent galleries were done. And since that time to 2015, user behaviors have changed tremendously. How people access information, how people navigate their way through museums, through content. I think earlier, Professor mentioned, and also the other speakers mentioned, in terms of how people are stuck to their phones to a certain extent, and rightly so. I think with the knowledge of the world essentially at your fingertips, to what extent is the museum still relevant in presenting just pure information in labels on the walls when people can actually access that quite easily? So once again, it's not to say that it is no longer relevant, but how do we make it even more relevant for museums to connect with audiences knowing that their behaviors of consumption have changed? So one of the challenges we took upon ourselves is to consider how do we bring a 200-year-old collection to life. And with this, we introduced the William Farquhar collection of natural history drawings. They are a 200-year-old collection of drawings that were commissioned to document the flora and fauna of the region, not just Singapore, of course, but Malaya. And with that, when we did the revamp in 2015, we wanted to introduce a digital component to it to say, how can we create an immersive environment to bring this collection to life, to make it relevant to audiences of today? For a lot of people, you would look at a painting and you don't really think too much about the conservation process behind it as well. But the fact is, for every 1 year I put that painting out on display, it has to rest in conservation for 4 years before I take it out again. So for a collection of 477 paintings and drawings, it is tremendously unlikely I'll be able to represent the entire 477 pictures or drawings in the collection in an exhibition. So we turned to digital then for this. How can we create relevance and through digital allow for greater access to this wonderful collection? We worked with TeamLab. Some of you might know them. They are a Japanese art collective. And we gave them a brief to say, we have a space, a 15-meter high dome. Can you recreate this experience such that we bring this wonderful collection of 477 drawings to life, reimagine, of course, as contemporary artists, but bringing it such that visitors can connect with this particular experience. So with this, visitors now to the museum are able to navigate through this dome. As you walk through the space, the digital assets inspired by the original collection come to life, and people are able to appreciate a lot better in terms of the context of how some of these animals, some of this flora, still represent what it is today in terms of Singapore and Malaya. What is interesting about this particular installation is also that we have found that in an immersive space like this, it allows us to also do a lot of other things, and this is quite crucial in the area of programming. We are able to actually extend the space to allow us to reach different demographics from people with additional needs such as autism. They found the space particularly calming. We run programs in that space catering to families with young children, toddlers, seniors. And what's important is that there is a social engagement component to it. There is a social interaction behind how people navigate the museum. It's not just to view a particular object. It's not the objective we want. What we want is for people to have conversations, to have interactions, such that it becomes rooted in their experience, that the museum is a place for lively conversations, and it remains relevant day to day to them. So this was our first venture, really, into a digital experience, immersive reality, if you will. It's not AR, it's not VR, but nonetheless, it's still a very immersive digital environment that we created with this. We then went on to explore something in the area of augmented reality, and what you see here is actually a virtual asset of a whale bone. So for a lot of you who are familiar with the National Museum's history, as I mentioned earlier, we had a strong natural history collection. A lot of people remember a whale bone that was suspended across the top of the National Museum. And that obviously has since been taken away, but there has been a lot of strong recollections to this. We thought that with augmented reality, with technology in that sense, we were able to explore an option, which is, are we able to bring a perspective of the museum back to our visitors that they would not otherwise be able to see? So as today you walk through the museum, we bring you through an architectural tour of the museum, we describe certain aspects of it, but wouldn't it be great if we could bring back some of these aspects virtually, that you are able to then kind of put yourself in that situation and view that scene as per how it used to be. So with this particular project, we worked with Google Tango. It was an experimental platform at that time. And we created an application that allowed for visitors who went through our architectural tours to also whip out the devices at certain junctures, certain locations, and view that space recreated based on 1950s images and photographs of that space. So you're able to have a kind of more immersive experience as you go through an architectural tour. And we felt very strongly that it had to be a guided experience. We didn't really want a case where people just use your own device and kind of go on a self-guided AR tour of the museum. We felt very strongly that the interaction, the social interaction of the guide being there to lead that process, of it being relevant not just to the user, but also to the person who is guiding, to be able to show those connections. And once again, putting people and social interactions at the center of our development framework. We work very closely with the docents to develop this application. And it was really a pilot, it's an experiment, and it worked really well. Visitors appreciated the fact as well that they could view something that they would not otherwise be able to see without the help of technology, but also that they had a choice, and that is also something to be considered when you talk about being accessible, being inclusive. People navigate spaces differently, people navigate content differently. Are you providing them the option of a choice? We launched a program called DigiMuse, and with this, the intention for the DigiMuse program was really to allow for museums and the cultural sector as a whole to start experimenting with new technologies. How are we able to bridge that so-called perceived divide that museums are spaces that perhaps you do not want a digital layering over it, that it may be, for some reason with digital, it detracts from the appreciation of the object itself. And this is something that I noticed in the Pigeonhole. I think some people have also kind of brought up as questions. But when we ran the DigiMuse project, the name itself, DigiMuse, was something that was considered quite a fair bit. Most people think it refers to a digital museum. Not so much. I referred back to the etymology of the term muse, and that really looks at of course, it originated from the Greek, where there were, I think, 9 goddesses or so who looked after the arts and science. But also the term muse being something of consideration, to muse over something, to think very deliberately before you kind of run into it or roll it out. And we wanted this project to be as such, where we are looking at the very considered approach to how technology and digital can be used to make meaningful experiences within a museum. One of the very first projects that we ran as part of this DigiMuse showcase is a virtual reality showcase. We brought in projects I think about 28 different VR films or projects that were done internationally. And we wanted to introduce our local audiences to get a sense of how they react to a new medium such as VR. As you can see, I mean, we ran a showcase over a weekend, and we had a great demographic of a good spread of people who participated in this VR showcase, from the elderly to the young. And what we found was that people really took to the medium. It's not necessarily the easiest to navigate. Those of you who have put on VR, there are various, I guess, prohibitions to you being able to test it on. First of all, if you're not used to it, it can be a bit intimidating to suddenly just block yourself out from the rest of the world. So we wanted to kind of run this and be able to test our audiences, as well as being able to get feedback from them on what do they like or what do they appreciate about this. And with VR, I think one of the kind of fundamental differences between a medium like VR is not really film. People tend to kind of sometimes think about it or conflate the two terms together. But, or 360 videos for the matter is not really VR. But to be inclusive about it, I think the technicalities don't really matter that much unless you're a producer of it. To most visitors, it's really about being in an immersive environment. You enter into the space, and with the VR medium, you're able to bring people, exclude them from everything else, and work with them on an almost one-to-one basis, and it becomes a lot more empathetic. So one particular example, I'm not sure whether it shows very well, is Notes on Blindness. I think this is quite a famous film. That was a VR project that was done, and this particular project, which we presented in the very first showcase, essentially documented the process of a person losing his sight, right? So if you were to put on the VR headsets, you would then go through this particular film project, and you'll be walked through step by step in terms of what it was like emotionally for that person to gradually lose his sight. So once again, it's a very empathetic approach to what technology can do in terms of connecting, not just from a knowledge or cognitive point of view, but from an emotional point of view. How can technology such as VR allow for some of these very emotive connections and personal connections to happen? And we thought this was a meaningful project. We had people who, and it's not the only one, I think there were quite a number which were very well done and connected with a lot of people. So a lot of our visitors who tried out the experiences, some of them went away crying because it really fundamentally struck them at a very personal level. So for DigiMuse, we went on into the next phase where we did an open call for digital art and innovative concepts. And with this, I think we wanted to have the opportunity then to also work with the local startups and industries to say, okay, what would you make of technology within museums? What are the kinds of ideas that you would come up with that will probably be interesting, probably a bit cutting edge in that sense, but we'll give you the opportunity to work with you and test out your ideas within the context of a museum. We have a ready audience. You have a great idea. Let's kind of work together and see what happens from it. I'm not going to run through all the projects, but just as a background, we had about 44 submissions from the open call. We selected and presented up to about 7 projects in the first round and another 3 in the next round in January. So this was one of the projects that we kind of went with, and it's called An Excavation Through Time. So this was proposed by a company called Immersively. They work a lot in the area of VR and AR. And they proposed essentially, and wouldn't it be great if someone were able to participate in an archaeological excavation virtually, right? So we thought it was an interesting premise. We paired them up with some local archaeologists, and we kind of got them down to the sites where certain archaeological sites were done, getting them to have a better understanding of the tools that were used, and speaking with archaeologists to also have an understanding of the conditions that people underwent with this. The outcome really was a project which allowed for visitors to be an archaeologist and to discover, I think, up to 3 or 6 objects, depending on the gameplay. And we placed this particular installation in the main Singapore History Gallery of the National Museum. And visitors were able to virtually excavate and work in pairs, because we wanted this, once again, to be a social experience. So it's not a solitary one, but we wanted a 2-player experience where 2 people were able to communicate and help each other through this process of excavation. And after they have kind of discovered or dug up the virtual object, they were able to find out more information about it. And after they take off the experience, they actually see the actual object in the showcase, the physical object, the physical artifact in the showcase beside them. And it continues that conversation once again of how they can see through a digital experience, you kind of bring it into a real-life experience, and hopefully they continue on the kind of engagements beyond. So this was one project that we thought was particularly interesting. This other project was called Project Insight, and it was done by a company called Holo. So the initial premise they came to us with was that through the HoloLens platform, this may be an interesting way for people to engage virtually with objects. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that people don't necessarily have a good appreciation of the conservation process. And as a museum, I think that's important for people to understand what is the many hundreds of hours of work sometimes that went into the conservation of a painting or an object before it goes on display. So with this particular project, we paired the developers up with our Heritage Conservation Center. So our conservators very kindly brought them through a process of what they went through to conserve this particular painting that you see that is also hanging at the National Museum's walls. So this is a painting of Sir Song Ong Siang, and it's located in our Modern Colony Gallery. The conservators went through a lot of effort to restore this particular painting. So there were X-ray views that were applied to look, of course, at the structural defects. You apply UV views to just take a look at some of the painting defects, and you get a sense of where the areas that were retouched or some perhaps not done so properly. And all these were actually compacted into this HoloLens experience. And as a visitor, as you see over there, they put on their headset, and they are guided through a process of conservation. So first of all, through the headset, you can actually see an AR overlay over the painting, and you can see the various defects. You apply an X-ray view, you see some of the structural defects. You apply a UV view, you see some of the painting defects. And you can pick the tools, the brushes, the chemicals that the conservators actually use, and have your hand at conserving or restoring that particular painting. It's also a guided experience. It can be guided by an actual conservator, standing beside you to kind of walk you through that process, or there can be an avatar which was introduced to just bring you through just a very simple step 1 to step 5 of what you need to do. So once again, this allows for a deeper interaction with our audiences, and more importantly, also with the curatorial and conservators to have that dialogue. Through an interactive like this, we were able to bring greater appreciation of an object and of artifacts, and this is where what we mean by when saying meaningful use of technology that doesn't necessarily detract, but in fact adds on to the value of an object and artifact. Chatbots. So this was another project that was supported under DigiMuse, and with this we wanted to, we thought the platform was interesting. Chatbots, as you're familiar with, some of you might be familiar with, it allows you to basically chat with an AI robot at the back, and kind of what we wanted to do with this was to introduce people to a collection of the National Museum, but through the chatbots, they are able to kind of ask questions and have a virtual conversation with them about the objects in the collection. So you can take a picture of the particular painting or drawing, and it triggers a response from the AI chatbot that tells you what it is, and you can continue the conversation to ask, oh, where can I find this? It can plot a location of where do you find this actual plant in a nearby location that you can walk to and go and look for it if you really want to. So these were all prototypes, obviously, and what we wanted to do with the chatbot and what we see potential in, once again, is extends the conversation beyond the walls of the museum. So while you come to the museum, you appreciate the objects. We want you to kind of go through a very carefully curated gallery. But when you leave, you can actually continue that engagement with the chatbots. If you buy a publication, perhaps there can be integration with that. And there can also be kind of a network of chatbots, if you will, which is something we tested out with Heritage Granny, the one you see on the left, or on my right. So Heritage Granny was another chatbot that we introduced to kind of bring people around to the Singapore Heritage Festival, where we had different events and activities that were happening. So if you were to engage with Heritage Granny, she would recommend certain places you should go to or certain events that you should kind of encounter or you should be recommended to go to. And it will link to Bus Uncle, which is another chatbot that some of you might be familiar with. And Bus Uncle will then recommend routes to take, which buses should you take to get from one place to another to get to the location that you want to. So once again, it becomes not just a one-to-one interaction between you and a chatbot, but almost an ecosystem of bots that you can actually work with at some point in time. Two more that I want to talk about. One is Playground Masters, and this was a hackathon that we conducted. It was in conjunction with an exhibition at the National Museum called The More We Get Together. It was about playgrounds in Singapore. And one of the digital kind of initiatives we did was to do a hackathon with teens. And with this particular project, we were able to get the teens to come down and basically look at creating a playground of the future. And for this particular project, we also ran, or rather the session was open to teens who are underserved in the underserved communities, and they were also participating in this particular project and created really wonderful kind of showcases for this. So in this sense, technology as a kind of a democratizing tool also allows us to reach different segments and curate and create interesting programs that we can reach to different people and get them interested in the things that we do. I think David mentioned yesterday that one of the challenges was really how do you reach out to youth? How do you as a museum remain relevant to people? And through programming, through things which they are familiar with or they are intrigued by, I think this was one of the examples that we went with. And the last project I'm going to talk about is Presence Playscape, and this was a partnership, which is a very important component of digital transformation. For Presence Pictures, they actually ran a workshop teaching kids, I think age range, I think between about 8 to 12, thereabouts. And what they did was to get the kids to go through an educational program to create and draw things in VR. So basically it's about spatial thinking. You get the kids within the age range to start kind of drawing or constructing their kind of visual landscape in 360. And from there, through a simple app that they created, you are able to take a photo of it, and it automatically renders it into 360. So the kids actually were able to draw their own view of a place and bring you into their view. So we thought the premise for this was interesting, and so we approached them and said, why don't you do something with the museum? Get the kids to come to the museum, get them to explore the museum, and see what inspires them. So the kids were given a very simple brief: go around the museum, create your museum mascot. Right? What do you think is a museum icon that might resonate with you? And some of them created monsters, some of them created aliens, some of them created, of course, cute animals. But we then got them to do an exhibition of their virtual works. So they came in and they narrated. So and there was an exhibition that was done in the concourse of the National Museum. So visitors were able to go take a look at the drawings that they did. Through the app, you're able to kind of view the 360 view of the kids, what they had drawn, what resonated with them through the museum. And they were able to also then narrate and bring you into their world. For the kids, what you see in terms of the stuffed toys, at the end of the experience, for those who went through the full experience, they actually get a physical stuffed toy of the mascot that they drew to bring home. So it extends the memory, and they have something of the museum that they are able to kind of cherish, I guess, for a long time. And we thought this was also a wonderful project that allowed us to connect with different people. Through the NHB's Heritage Cares program, we brought groups of people in, underserved communities who were able to participate in a shortened version of this program as well. So I think, once again, it allows for us to reach out to different communities. So that's a lot to digest. I guess it's really a broad base of projects that we have done, and there are more. But with this, I guess we'll leave the rest for the Q&As. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Choo. Thank you for emphasizing that people like to be rooted in social experiences, not in places, and that museums should be a place for us to converse, to interact, form emotive connections. Coincidentally, you didn't know this while you were speaking. This was the topic or the theme around which a lot of the pigeonhole questions about what does it mean to replace physical with digital? Are physical and digital equivalent? Could they ever be? But before we jump into Pigeonhole, would anyone like to bridge seamlessly the physical and virtual world by asking a question in person? We welcome you to be the brave virtual soul, well, in-person soul. If not, we'll jump on the digital. And the top question on Pigeonhole, let me pull up. Well, so 5 out of 6 of them really are about this assumption that physical cannot equate to digital. And my sense is that actually people don't buy it. So I'm going to read out the first question. Although I will say that the other questions also covered that theme. How do we navigate leveraging on technology yet maintaining the value and benefits of visiting a physical cultural space? And while I'll let you folks think about it, I realize this question comes out a lot. And I'm sure that for all of us in this space of museum and cultural institutions, this comes out a lot. So then, since we're all here and we can actually do a physical vote, here's a question for you. Do you think that after you've seen a digital space, your curiosity to actually visit the physical space is satiated? Meaning to say, after you visit the online website or the AR, VR, whatever technology, do you think you will then not visit the physical? Please raise your hand if after seeing digital, you will not see the physical. 1, thank you for your 2, 3, thank you for raising your hands, brave souls. 4, someone who's like a 4.5, we're good. 4 and a 7, 4.7, 5.7. We have another 0.5. That's great, we'll go to 6.2. 6.2 out of all of us in the room. Anyone else? Last chance. 7.2, unequivocal. Going once, going twice. All right, so if you look around, clearly, I think most of us feel that if we see the digital, we will still see the physical. And so the follow-up question is this. If you think that you are still curious enough to see the physical, do you think it is worth pouring all the resources into the digital? Please raise your hand if you think you would still invest heavily in digital as a representation of the physical. Yeah, that's a lot of people. I would say it's maybe 1/3. 1/3? Yeah. So with that, and having a sense of what most people in the room think, panelists, what do you think?
Hello. Yep. I think I like to quote the CEO for Etsy. I think it was. I think he mentioned something because he gets this question quite a fair bit as well. And in the context, it's really his reply was quite flippant, but quite interesting in that just because someone is on Tinder doesn't mean he doesn't want to meet the real person at the end of it. You know, so. And that's really a gist of that as well. I think for that matter, Spotify, I mean, just because you listen to the music doesn't mean that you wouldn't want to meet the singers or go to a concert. And to me, at the end of it, what differentiates it is really central in terms of the social interactions that come from it. So after the day, people crave connections. People need connections at some point or others. It doesn't mean, of course, that the digital connections are irrelevant. They are as meaningful as anything else. And I think one of the powers of social media in that sense is really being able to connect vast numbers of people across, regardless of borders, demographics, and all that. But at the center of that, you know, the success of Facebook, Twitter, and all this is really that engagement and social interactions once again. And this poses then the challenge back to museums beyond kind of allowing people to access information about the content, about the objects and artifacts. What else can museums offer as a social space, as a civic space? And that's where things like programs come in, differentiated experiences. How can we leverage and embrace some of these challenges brought about by digital? Can we make use of it in a better way? And allow us to then connect, once again, as a museum, in terms of the museum's voice, the museum's mission, with the aspirations and inclinations of our audiences. And I think that to me is a challenge, but also an exciting one for museums to undertake.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question. What else can museums do if all of us, when we visit a museum, we can now Google? So I would actually hop on my phone and Google everything to know about this artwork in front of me, right? So museums would clearly have to offer something more besides the physical space. Would you like to hop in?
Yes, to me, well, I think digitalization doesn't refer narratively means the LED screen, the projections. It refers to a more inclusive matters. I myself do digitalization, curation, and installations as well. And I myself know that although I do digitalization, I think this cannot replaceable of the authentic works. So I myself use not only the digital screens, projections, but also I used installation to show something else that the visitors could not get from the authentic work. For example, we use the smell to let people touch, feel the exterior of the objects, and to see very detail of the textile, and to see how the working manufacturing of the object. That is the things that visitors cannot see from the authentic works. So that should our job include. And also, I see that one of the questions I see is if you hear, you can get the music at home, would you go to the concert? I think the same way. So people go to the museum or go to the concert, did not looking for just go for the music or for the painting itself. They feel the atmosphere of the whole museums, I think, and the interactions between the musicians and the audience, and you feel being touched at the same time with the people sitting beside you, and you exchange thought and feelings together, and I think that is brilliant. It's not just hear the music. Okay, if you want a private place and you enjoy the music, you can hear it at home. So we go to the concert, go to the museum, so we can appreciate the works with other people. I totally agree. Mr. Choo has said that we need social interactions in the museum. Besides digitalization, we need. We try to add interactive factors inside the virtual reality kind of things. So I think that is more important than simply digitalization.
Yes, as Ms. Ye said, you cannot get 100 information from digital things. Even, of course, with the real, you cannot get 100 information, but it's a lot less through the digital. So you have to see the real things. And for me, apart from the things that is born already as digital, digitals are just a gateway or hook to the real things to me. And I have my photo of my wife here, but I still want to see her. And yes, the photo is controllable, and my real wife is not controllable. But that's part of the real things. So I can have the photo is controlled by the photographer and everything neatly done, and the real thing, the real person not. But still, I like to have the direct contact with the real person, the real things, to have as much as information I can have. So I think it's just a gateway and a hook. Thank you.
We'll send a note to your wife to let her know.
Yeah, can I add on to that as well? I think, but what is interesting as well is also what digital can allow in terms of insights into an object that would otherwise not be possible. I think I mentioned a little bit about that, but for instance, I think one of the ironies of visiting a museum is that everything is behind a showcase. You can't actually see it very well sometimes. You can't actually touch it. You can't appreciate some of the details, the nuances behind some of the works in that sense, the very virtue of museums needing to conserve and protect the objects, the artifacts, actually makes it inaccessible. And I think that's where possibly I think we're looking at digital to bridge some of these divides. I mean, through digital, I've seen really good virtual museums. I mean, to be very honest, I think you're able to virtually move up close and see a painting with the texture, not just a 2D flat image, but the texture of the painting as well, up close, 2 cm away virtually. And that's an experience you're never going to be able to see in an actual museum. You're not going to be allowed to get that up close to that painting. So I think there are merits to how the considered use of technology can actually bridge some of these physical divides, I think.
So we have very many questions, but there's one that I think continues on this thread. How do you convince curators that interacting with digital replicas and of artworks and artifacts is okay? Bracket, how do you wipe off shock, horror, anger, disdain, continued, etc., off their faces? I will direct this to Ms. Ye, because I think coming from the digital media team, I'm sure you interact a lot. Please feel free for everyone to jump in.
Well, actually, the curators I've met or cooperated with, they are amazed by our work. They never show horror, shock, or anger. Okay, because I think we display things that the authentic works could not do, that is our advantage. We doing 3D models of the authentic works and display at the same time, actually. So the real work is display in the cabinet, and people could go around to see the exteriors, but not at the bottom. But in the screens, we show the 3D model, which can be amplified to full size, which is very large. And people spin around to see the bottom, to see the remarks of this object, and amplify and show the structure of this object. For example, I display a warm box for the ink warm box, and people usually see this object and don't know how it works. So we use the 3D model to show how it works. So in winter, you draw there's a drawer in the box, and you put it off, and there's a box you can put in the corner or pour some hot water inside, and this keeps the ink warm. And in the winter, the ink won't be frozen, and you can't write on it with it. So we use animations or interaction animation to show this function. So how this works. So the curator appreciate our works. They think this is the bonus to the traditional exhibition.
Well, I think I'm thankful. I think our curators have been very supportive of this process, and also our conservators. I think good to say that. I guess one of the things is curators always have a lot of content they want to cram into a 150-word caption, which is not possible. So I think one kind of really potential is really how can digital help to allow them to say more and really to provide more information and content that once again is otherwise limited and restricted. So I think on this note, I think my experience with curators here is, and internationally as well, I think they do see the potential in it. They are, of course, and for very good reasons, I think also wary about how it can necessarily distract someone from a museum experience. But I think if you were to work with them very closely on it, I think in general, I find that there is a very good kind of conversation being held about how digital can actually help enhance the museum experience and really meet the objectives that they want as curators in terms of getting the content out to people. A side kind of note on this is I do see the term, and also in the context of the conversations, a lot of talk about replicas and digital reproductions, but I think we also need to consider digital and digital art, digital creations as being originals in themselves. And then the struggle with museums is how do we collect or preserve or even kind of document some of these things. Often we take for granted a lot of the letters that were written that we keep in a collection or notes. Now everything's in emails, on Facebook, on Twitter. Now, do we document some of these? How do we document some of these? At some point we will lose all documentary evidence of anything if we are so intent on only collecting the physical. Because the fact is most of us now transact in the digital realm. So I think that is a really real problem for curators and museums to deal with.
All right, so you've convinced the curators, it sounds like. But this question, I'm not sure if I'm reading it correctly, but how I interpret it is, do you now have to market these physical spaces in a special or different way when the digital version already exists? This is my interpretation of the question. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong if you raise this question. Would either Mr. Choo or Ms. Gaille like to answer this? I'm saving the place-making identity question for Professor.
Oh.
Giving you the heads up.
Yeah,
First, do you think I've interpreted the question correctly?
I think so. It's just that I haven't digitized the gallery in that sense, so I don't really have the experience from moving offline to online. So I don't. Maybe Ms. Gaille can have a crack at it first.
Okay. Let me think about it. Well, I want to raise an example of our works. we do have an app called Emperor's Wardrobes. Basically introduce the clothes of the emperor, and we have the same topic, but different content projection in our digital galleries named the court clothes, I believe. You see, they share the same content of the clothes in the Qing dynasty, but it's totally different presentation. So when people enjoy the app, so it's an online project. So he can be at home at ease, have enough patience to read through the words, the text, and see the animation long enough to kill his time. But in the gallery, when the space is surrounded by people, so he didn't have enough patience to read the same words. So it has to be short, and it has to be eye-catching, and he even can take pictures of himself. He show his face and post it to his social media. So that is a different way of presentation. Although the content are the same, but it is the different way to display it. And I also want to raise an example of the things we digitalized and architecture. That's one of the architectures in our museum. I heard that many of you have watched the drama 慈禧攻略. I don't know how many of you have watched it. Well, it's a hit drama in Asia, at least in China, and people after watching this show, and people went to our museum and see where is the palace of Yanxi Gong, and in English, I believe it's a prolonging happiness hall. Okay, and people were shocked to see that there is no such things, because in the drama, the palace of Yanxi Gong is well established with the red walls and the yellow glazed things. But actually in the history, the palace was burned down, totally destroyed in, I believe it's in Daoguang reign, it's middle 19th century, I believe. So when the palace was totally burned down, the Qing dynasty, Qing government tried to rebuild a Western-style architecture. So they built a two-storied architecture, and unfortunately, this building was unfinished because the Qing government were out of money because of the war. So you can see the structure of this Western-style architecture unfinished. So people went there and see this. In Chinese, we say 烂尾楼 means unfinished buildings. And so he want to see, what would it look like when it's finished? So we use the virtual reality technology to rebuild this architecture to see what it look like when it's done. So it's a two-storied architecture with basement 1 and 1 on the earth, and you can see there's a pool surrounding this building, and the people in the basement 1 can see the swimming fish outside this building. So this is one of the projects we released online on our website. So if you are interested, you can see it.
Thank you. One of the questions it's one of the earliest questions, so it's been lingering for a while. It's on placemaking. I'm going to pull that up. I'm going to direct that to Professor Mitsuru, largely because, as an archaeologist, I think you spend a lot of time in one place, digging it up and getting to know that place. Heritage is often seen as place-specific. How does going digital disrupt this or create new ways of building place identity? That's a big one.
So there are two types of property. One is movable, and the other one is immovable. And what we deal as archaeologists is, of course, movable objects, but mainly with the sites, buildings, cities, which are immovable. And There in Latin, I think you know, the genius loci, the holy god of the location, is living there, and you cannot move it. And somehow you can feel it when you go there. So in the digital world, you cannot make a replica of the genius loci. So I think you have to go there to feed it. And also at the same time, as I showed you a little bit, the site from that site is very, for example, important. And you have to know how close the water is. And so that you have to go to the site to understand, especially the immovable properties. So that is one of the answer I think I can make. And also there was a former question in which says, what was that? I think, as I said, it's the digital thing is, as I said, just a gateway and a hook to the real things. But at the same time, once I was in Louvre, I was in front of the Mona Lisa by Da Vinci, and a lady beside me was saying, "This is just like the one I saw in the photo book." And it is. And yeah, I agree with her in a sense that we today are there are so many figures, so many figures in this real world and also in digital worlds. So maybe we have forgotten what the figure has inside. It had anima, kind of the soul inside. When you create a human-like figure and you put the two eyes there, it's not anymore just a rock or clay, but it's something with anima, soul inside. And that is why I think in Buddhist, after the nirvana, the human-like image of Buddha was not allowed to create for centuries. And that is why I think I showed you the famous photo, which is called Peace Christ, and in which the artist is saying, I believe, is that we are cheapening the images too much. So he put that image into his piece. So I think by doing that and taking the photo of that, he was saying that we are the one that cheapening the images, and we are surrounded too much in real world and digital world by images. And it was not so, at least in ancient time. So we have to remember that. Thank you.
I think maybe also kind of looking at it, I mean, the very virtue of place identity and place management, place making, I think I kind of suspect who had asked this question. Yes. But I think the fact that it is a physical place, and hence I think the heritage is pretty much still place-centric. But maybe to unpack this a little bit is also to understand, I guess, when you talk about term heritage, are you talking about tangible heritage versus intangible heritage? So in that sense, the tangible heritage component of it in terms of the physical place will still remain. I mean, the National Museum will still be a place where memories are made. With regards to digital, I mean, apart from the fact that the National Museum is now a Pokemon gym, and a whole generation of people probably grew up now having explored and made friendships and maybe fell in love at the National Museum over Pokemon. I think these are interactions, once again, enabled by digital, but still very much social interactions that happen at the National Museum. But they still remember the place as a place-specific experience. But over time, I think, and this is something we cannot discount, that the whole aspect of social and digital engagements can or perhaps will inevitably become an aspect of intangible cultural heritage at some point in time. And I think that is something to look ahead to, but probably not something quite pertinent at this stage, I think.
And you both mentioned people get attached to things. And actually, two of the questions mentioned this popular drama, Yanxi Palace. Am I pronouncing it right? I have not watched it, but it must be very popular. I'll pull up the two related questions. One, after the Hall of Mental Cultivation project, and with the current craze of the episode Yanxi drama, which I need to watch, will your team dive into perhaps a project focusing on Yanxi Palace? And please hold your horses, because there is another question. Is that popular? With the recent popularity of dramas like Yanxi Palace, many come to see the palace but may be disappointed that the existing palace has been modified. How do you bridge that gap with IT?
Well, the next exhibition is definitely not Yanxi Palace. Make you disappointed. Well, when we choose the topic of the digital exhibition, we first digging the information, the historian fact that whether it's enough for a digital exhibition content. Well, unfortunately, the Yanxi Palace is not a huge topic that we can dig enough information about it. So, and the next thing is we have, I've tried many presentation way, and next we want to shift our thinking and try to do more immersive experience, and rather than the simplest human screen interaction things. So, and the next question is, I already answered that question. So.
No, but maybe in the future?
Yeah, probably.
All right, thank you. So the next question is about, could we have a similar Ask Jamie version to educate public in museums? This one requires a little bit of context. Do you folks know what is Ask Jamie? Nobody? Wait. Okay, most people are Singaporeans. I'm sad. So if you go to a government website, there is a chat box on your bottom right, and there is a lady's face. We have chosen to call her Jamie. Jamie's face is actually a composite, an amalgamation of very many people, is what I've heard. So it's not actually a real person. But you can ask things like, what did Mr. Choo speak about today at the NHB event or at the CAC? And the answers should pop up. So it's AI powered and is actually very similar to Heritage Granny, I think. Maybe you want to explain what Heritage Granny is, how the project was conceptualized, and maybe if you think that would be useful as a permanent tool.
We introduced Heritage Granny earlier this year, and we wanted to kind of consider whether could a chatbot help kind of facilitate some of the many questions that we get for the festival. You know, when is it happening? What would you recommend? What are the events that you think you want to go to? And so we thought that a chatbot might be useful, but also at the same time, I mentioned earlier, we wanted that. We were intrigued by the idea that chatbots could also have a social interaction component in terms of handing off to Bus Uncle and all that. So I think for a bit of context for the international guests as well, Bus Uncle was a chatbot that was created by this guy who started it as a passion project. Basically, his friends were complaining that, hey, I have no clue how to get from one place to another. So he built this chatbot just to direct his friends to say that, okay, you just ask and he'll lead you from Sengkang to Jurong or whatever, and recommend the bus routes. No, so, but that took off, and Bus Uncle had a personality, and I think that's an important point, where people felt that they could engage with the character of the chatbot, knowing obviously that it's not a real person. At least most people know, but they were able to engage with it and were able to kind of crack jokes with Bus Uncle and all that. So it was kind of an interesting phenomenon in itself as a kind of useful or successful deployment of a chatbot. And we wanted Heritage Granny to also be a test bed for that. Can it leverage off that kind of social interactions? And so I think Heritage Granny was officially launched on Mother's Day this year, and she was introduced as Bus Uncle's mother. You know. Yes, but Bus Uncle already had a wife, so we couldn't kind of make that connection. So anyway, so once again, it was kind of working on the premise that, hey, this might be interesting. And of course, we have since been kind of building onto it. It was really a prototype. We didn't kind of do a lot of announcements on it. But the intent is really, I think, perhaps to answer this question as well, to introduce people to heritage sites. We've been feeding it information related to trails, heritage trails that were done by the National Heritage Board, events, monument buildings. So these are things that we are currently testing out, and using that as potentially also integrating that with the NHB website, where visitors can then go in and you start kind of finding out information from the Roots website. But at the same time, if you wish to have an interaction with a chatbot and kind of have an engagement there, sure, it might be a viable option. So I mean, in short, to answer the question, yes, we are trying it out. Of course, it is complex because when it comes to AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, chatbots, it can go very wrong sometimes. It depends on what are the questions that are asked of it. It depends on the information that's fed to it. It responds accordingly. So it's really a trial and error process. But certainly, I think we see some potential in it. One thing I wanted to just highlight is that it's also the access to it. At this moment, Heritage Granny, for instance, is only on Facebook. So you can access Heritage Granny through Facebook Messenger. What we tested out with the other project, which is the Ask William project, was really to have the chatbot integrated with WhatsApp. So as you know, all of you probably have WhatsApp or are WhatsApping right now. And imagine going into a museum and you kind of, all you need to do instead of downloading an app is to add a number. So add a friend, in this case, William. You add a number and you start asking, oh, so where should I go? Which galleries are nice? What events are happening? How do I get from one place to another? So once again, it's reducing some of the psychological barriers to getting someone to need to download an app, for instance, or to need to go through many steps, or to register on Facebook, or to be perceived to be giving up your information. Privacy is, of course, a concern when it comes to data. And if we are able to lower some of these, it may become a very natural phenomenon then for people to start engaging through chatbots. And I think that's something we are hoping to test out in greater detail moving forward.
Yes, we can do more of that, of course.
I'm sorry, I don't know this Ask Jamie version, but who made this? And is this interactive? Or because I myself, I'm a teacher, but I don't like educating from top to down, up teacher, down students. I rather want to be always interactive and learn together. Of course, I will be the leading person, but so I think that's what I wanted to say when I showed the concept of inclusive design. So make the thing together.
Yes. So for some context, I might be wrong, but my understanding is Ask Jamie is a government project. It is for government websites. It is a chatbot. I think it was built in conjunction between many agencies, but also GovTech, which is the implementing agency for Smart Nation. So it is essentially a chatbot. So if you are on the housing website and you wonder how much in subsidies is Gaille eligible to get for housing, you can type this using natural English. And why this is innovative in many technical ways is that it uses natural language processing, meaning you can just speak however you feel comfortable with, instead of using technical academic terms. I think what was meant to be very fun about it is that you speak to it like a human. So I suppose Heritage Granny is something that you just say, hey, what time does a museum open? And it will respond to you also in natural conversation. Yes. And I think it therefore shares a bit of the inclusiveness, it meant to be welcoming by design. Yes. So we have 1 more minute left, but I wanted to end off letting each of the panelists have a quick say to round off the conversation. But really, what is one thing you think that the audience, that we could do in 2019 to gain one more digital museum experience? Is it going for an event? Do you recommend a website? What one thing you think that we can do after this? Maybe we'll start with Mr. Choo.
I don't know, that's a tough one. I mean, I would say visit the National Museum, but I mean, we are trying out new stuff. I think in January we are launching a digital art showcase. I think earlier I mentioned the open call. And it is, so in a lot of the prototypes we tested out are in the area of museum experience, and it's really how people engage with objects and artifacts. But we do see digital as being something that artists are inspired by as well. And I think in the January showcase, we will be looking at how technology has inspired artists. But for me, I mean, without kind of plugging the museum programs too much, it's really getting involved and being willing to try. I think technology evolves at such a rate it changes all the time. I mean, platforms are obsolete after a year, and that's something that developers or even projects, as we embark into it, we need to be cognizant of some of these developments. But for the user, I think it's really being willing to test out and give it a go. I mean, whether or not there's a personal aversion to kind of maybe being suspicious of machines or being suspicious of technology in that sense. But when it comes to different immersive reality solutions, whether it's a chatbot or whether is it kind of working on data and what is the potential of data to kind of reach and affect your individual life, I think the more important aspect is really to give it a go in whichever form that kind of makes sense to you and how you want to engage with, in my case, I guess, museums and the content that it offers.
Thank you, Professor Mitsuru.
So agriculture was revolutionary. And once we started that agriculture technique, we cannot go back anymore. And industrialization was a revolution. And this information is also, and whether I like it or one likes it or not, we cannot go back. And this is very good. So we have to live with this. But still, as long as we are, I think we're real. So we have to, the principle of the museum or culture institution is that the base is the real. And on top, we can build the digital world. And for some person, it might be more free and natural to be there, but we should not forget that we are living in this real world.
Thank you, Ms. Gaille.
Well, I'm supposed to say two of my digital exhibitions. One it will be opened next October, and the one is the Dorman Digital Gallery. And the third one, I want to recommend the team lab work, Mori Gallery in Tokyo. And that is the company I appreciate very much. And this is my personal preference. And their thought of, their thinking of break the border between the nature and the human beings is very, very, very good. And I mentioned that the interaction between the human and the human action can make things different, and it's also shown in their works. And I said the digitalization haven't to necessary to be the projections or the screens, and you can see there they invent some physical touch, tangible things that you can interact with, and your move can change the color, or you hear the music of what is coming out. So this feelings is. Although it's one presentation way of digitalization, but it's more natural. So if you want to go there, and this is my third recommendation. So.
Thank you. So as the panel says, digital disruption is here. We cannot go back, and I'm excited to see the recommendations that you have. Please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you very much. And also, of course, thank you, Ms. Gaille Teo, as well, for being the moderator. Let's give her a big hand as well. Thank you. Can we have a group photograph, please? So, discussing the topic on digital transformation, as well as creating access. Great information that we have here for something for us to think about when we get back. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to our panel. Thank you. I'd like to invite you back to your seats. Thank you. Well, so ladies and gentlemen, 2 wonderful days exploring the topic of accessibility for diverse communities, the role of cultural institutions, and from there we went to many peripheral topics as well. So lots of information, all for us to think about, to ponder as we go back to our own organizations, as we go back to our own institutions. We started with our guest of honor address yesterday, SMS, followed by DS spoke as well. We had 3 panels yesterday. Today we had 2 panels as well as a sharing session. And of course, not forgetting yesterday, we also had our keynote address by Dr. Fleming. So here to round up everything up over these 2 wonderful days, I'd like to welcome, well, of course, the organizer of this event is Culture Academy. So I'd like to welcome the director of Culture Academy, Ms. Tangama Katigetu, to give us the closing roundup. Let's give her a big hand, please.
Hello, good afternoon. I know I'm the last person standing between you, tea and the weekend. So I'll just make a very short speech and thank you everybody who stayed back today because I know it's really end of the week. Okay, and I think you all agree with me that it has been a very exciting 2 days of intellectual and thought-provoking debates on what as cultural institutions we have to do to increase our accessibility to our diverse communities. In fact, when we first started thinking about what to discuss this year, my colleagues and I actually had 3 questions that we wanted answered. The first was, how do we define diversity? What and who are we addressing? Can we be everything to everyone? And how do we prioritize? If you thought that was the 3 questions, no, that's question number 1. Okay, question number 2 is, why do we need to make our venues, programs, and exhibitions accessible? And lastly, what do we need to do, or to do more or less of, to be more accessible to our colleagues and our patrons? I think we have answered most of those questions over the 2 days of panel discussions and debates. And of course, there are some unanswered questions. But I see this conference as only being the beginning of many more in-depth discussions we have to have on how do we really address these shortcomings or these inaccessible issues that we need to overcome. So I hope that the discussions and conversations don't stop today, now, but they will continue with the newfound friends you have met over the 2 days, or maybe people you met last year in the last year's conference. So I hope this conversation continues as well. And I would like to finish off by thanking quite a few people, but my first thanks goes to Dr. David Fleming for setting aside his very busy time to be here over the 2 days and to give that very, very insightful keynote, which I think all of you appreciated. And then I also would like to thank our very esteemed and eminent panel of speakers and moderators who actually, despite their very busy schedules, I know some of you actually are running between this conference and going to another conference. So thanks very much for setting aside your time for these 2 days to be with us and to also share your experiences with all our colleagues in the sector. And I would also like to thank our performers yesterday, the SOTA and the DMA, who actually went out of the way as well to come and start the conference. And of course, our venue partners, the Esplanade, Rochelle and team have been actually very, very good. They have actually bent a few rules just to accommodate our request. So thank you very much for the professional work and for ensuring that everything went through like clockwork. Okay, and I also wish to thank all our partners. You heard my DS saying yesterday, the Deputy Secretary saying that we have 28 partners this year, so I don't want to take up your time, but you can see the full list of our partners in our online program booklet, which you can download, and Lester has been plugging this on. And as you can see, culture has to go and embrace technology. So which is why we have gone online. Most of it has become online, including your registration. And the other thing is that we realized that we had to be environmentally friendly. So which is why we didn't print the booklets this year. And those of you who have been coming very often to our conferences would have noticed that your tote bag this year is very much lighter than the last 2 years because we don't have any more brochures from our sister agencies. So that's our little bit to save the environment. Okay. Okay, I also like to thank our Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth for all their advice and support. And I must also thank my great team of all women. I have no idea why we always employ women, but it's nothing to do with diversity, but it just so happens that we all ended up as an all-women team. Okay, so I would like to thank my colleagues, Pei-Chin, Chia-Ying, Vais, Geraldine, Ashwinder, Serene, and Humaya, who actually were the backbone behind this organization because they made sure that all of you were very well looked after and everything ran like clockwork. So thank you very much, ladies. And then last but not least, I would like to thank all of you, especially those of you who are still sitting here at 4+ on a Friday. Thank you very much for coming and asking all those interesting questions because I think the conference is as interesting, not only with the speakers, but the kind of questions they are asked and the challenging answers that you give or you ask questions. So I would just like to end by saying have a lovely festive and holiday season, and happy 2019. And I hope all of you to see all of you next year. Just to give a little bit of plug-in, next year's theme for the conference is on identity, because Singapore is commemorating our bicentennial. So I hope to see all of you next year. The conference will not be in December, it'll be in November next year. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Tangama. Okay, so I know you're going to go. 2 minutes, please, promise. 2 minutes, okay, before you go. I want to let you know as well, after this is not the end. We do have tea break available for all of you, okay? So same place here. Also, very important, as you heard from Director mention, we want to do better to really create better conference for you. So we have a feedback form that we'd like all of you to please help us. So go to Pigeonhole once again, please, now, if you can, okay? Under session 2, day 2, please leave us your feedback. Let us know how we can do better, or let us know what we did well. Let us know what you want to see. Of course, give us your comments as well. And at the end of it, we do have a column where you put in your email. So this email is actually very important, because if you want the graphic recorder, the recordings that Miss Wendy did, we will send it to your email. All right, so please input it via Pigeonhole. If you can please help us, that would be really, really good. Now also on your way out as well, after you have done the survey, please also exchange for the printed graphic recording. All right, so we have printed it out slotted it into a very nice envelope for you. So please, on your way, exchange for the very nice graphic recording. All right, so this marks 2 days of wonderful conference. We thank all of you for being here, as our director has mentioned as well. So we look forward to seeing you, of course, next year. Thank you very much for your strong support. Thank you to all our speakers as well. Give yourselves a big round of applause. Thank you so much, everybody. And tea break is now available, so I hope you're still hungry. So please go ahead, help yourselves, and of course, keep the interactions going, as some of you have mentioned as well. So thank you, and we'll see all of you next year. Thank you.